remember my phone was sitting next to me and it said Dad calling me, and I'm like, that's weird because normally when he calls, they call me from their London phone. I listened to the voicemail and I'm sure it was like, call me back. And so I called him and he was like, I am so sorry. Your mom's been killed. Your mom's been stabbed.
Welcome to the Rise Above podcast. I'm Kevin Lanning, your host. Today's episode, we sit down with Shannon, a licensed medical professional specializing in addiction and substance abuse, an LCSW, and clinical director of one of the largest treatment facilities in South Florida. She's also, in her personal life, crossed paths with untreated mental illness when her mother's life was fatally taken by someone who had a schizophrenic episode. Let's rise above with Shannon. Shannon, welcome to Rise Above.
Hello, Kevin. Thank you for having me.
You live in Boca Raton.
I do.
How was your ride over?
Oh my gosh, it was very, very fast. It was like 5 minutes.
That's awesome.
I live right up the road.
You just recently moved too.
I did. Well, I moved like 0.25 miles because that's all I can do in the bubble. It's comforting. East Boca. It's very comfortable there.
I love Boca Raton. It's beautiful.
It is. It is. Mm-hmm.
East of 95. It's so refreshing over there.
That's the only experience I've had. So, yeah, I just stay there. Mm-hmm.
So you are an LCSW. When did you become an LCSW?
So I moved down here for my master's degree in 2013. So I became an LCSW probably 6 years ago after graduating my master's in 2015, going through the licensure process. Took about 3 years, and I've been licensed probably about 6 to 7 out in the field. I've specialized and had experience in both dual diagnosis, co-occurring mental health and substance abuse, dependency, all of that.
Okay, and do you work at a facility?
Yes, so I'm a clinical director of a multiple facilities. We actually just opened up a strictly intensive SRT strictly mental health facility, 30 beds, which has been very, very intense. And then also we have our 2 detox, which is inpatient hospitals. So like if you don't know what that means, right? It's like, what does that mean? Detox. Detox is like if you are dependently on anything and you need to come off of it and you need to do it in a safe space. So medical detox. So we're a hospital level of care. So again, I am in a high acuity stabilization. So with that, there's a detox and there's like a residential where you get like more therapeutic care with medical care. And that kind of spans to 28 days. So I'm strictly in this stabilization. That's what I've been, high acuity, for the past like 4 years. Before that, I was in long-term outpatient care. So I've been in kind of both. The mental health facility is kind of the same, right? So it's right under a Baker Act. So it's right under, some kind of psychosis mania, some kind of disruption that's happening without any substances, right? You might be using a substance just to fall asleep, but this something that is occurring is something that needs to be medicated and stabilized in such a high environment that you might require a 1-to-1. You really do need everything stripped down and a safe person, a licensed person, and a doctor there every single day to monitor your meds so that you can get back on a medication regimen. So again, those are high acuity patients. So you're looking at, anywhere from 7 to 28 days. So that's what I've been doing since COVID. I know that therapy and kind of like what the world has been going around, I've really just kind of jumped into like feeling like an essential worker with what's kind of transpired. So
have you seen a significant spike in substance abuse since COVID?
Yes. I mean, it's crazy because it's not necessarily a spike. It's more of when COVID ended, people weren't able to stop their drinking. And that's when it had been already normalized. There was no accountability. The world stopped for 2 weeks, and then companies shut down months, gave people severances or, allowed for remote work. And, where's the initial accountability? Where's the check-in? Where's the login? And I really did see a lot of really high functioning people start drinking a lot more, and then dependently drinking, and then having a problem, within their relationships, within their job performance, and within their, honestly, physical health. It was apparent, after a while. And I think that kind of spiked. So yes and no. I think the people that were normally weekend benders, and I think the people that have, the social skills to maintain drinking during the week, I think that kind of increased a little bit for them, and they weren't able to tame it down when it was time to tame down.
It manifested to something much greater.
It did. For a lot of people. And a lot of people, it doesn't have to take a hospital. You don't have to go to step into detox and be medicated. You don't have to be medicated and be in a detox. People can intervene in other ways, and I've seen it work.
So you're a clinical director. You, as an entry-level LCSW, you don't start as a clinical director.
No.
What qualifications do you need to become a clinical director?
So you usually have to have 5 to 7 years of experience in the field, specifically to the population that you're addressing. I kind of got grandfathered into a situation where right after graduating with my master's, I was afforded to kind of relax and travel. And I traveled, and then, I did a first round of interviews, and I really landed on this one place because it fit location-wise, and the owner just seemed really, really cool. And I was like, this just feels good. And the pay was horrible. It's so funny. He would laugh with it today. But and I took it, and I ended up starting as a clinician, as the first of I was a part of a team of 5 others, and they just threw me in. Obviously knowing that I had, all the clinical background of the training, I had the bones of it, but really how I started therapy was going in there. And I remember my first therapy session, I Googled what to ask as a therapist. And this is I remember, and I was such a new girl, right? They're this girl right out of college. She's and it was strictly substance abuse, and it was outpatient. And so when I came in, I wasn't any part of a structure. I had, supervisors, and they gave me all the rough girls. So they gave me immediately, I had a caseload of all the problem patients that they didn't want to deal with. And so I really just immediately hit adversity in there. But with that, I eventually became clinical lead, clinical director, before coming to the company that I am now. And I absolutely love the 8 years that I was with the first company that I was with, and it ended up being great, but it was crazy. I mean, substance abuse group therapy. I mean, there's stories. It was a wild time, and it was also a time. So think about this historically. This was right before fentanyl was a thing. So in that time, it was it was a heroin problem, right? So it was bags and bags a day. And then when fentanyl came off, that's where we experienced first patient loss. I mean, I had bliss. I mean, I had probably a full year, and fentanyl became a thing, and it started popping, and it was those that were just leaving, for that night, relapsing, and it would take them. And it was crazy because it threw treatment into grief and loss, and that was incorporated in it. And it's so, crazy because you're talking to people that struggle with mortality and suicidality because they're doing things that they know could possibly kill them. And so you're trying to strike that chord and it's not resonating with some, and you lose them, and you have these conversations and still it doesn't happen. And it really does, it takes a lot out of people. And I think that the only way I could be a really good clinician was kind of to step back out of being primary therapist for, 6 years in a row. And I could really do good work supervising clinicians and then picking, I get to cherry pick from certain facilities patients that I want to work with. But they end up being, patients that are kind of like the first round of patients that I was given. It's a full circle moment. The patients that end up being rougher, take a lot more time and take a lot more work, but I make that time for them.
So to take a step back into your childhood and growing up, was there a specific time in your life where something happened, where it kind of pushed you to go into mental health and want to pursue a career in mental health?
So the first thing I could, as a child, the first thing I can think of if someone asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up was always a teacher. But both my parents were teachers, like in my head. My mom was a special ed teacher, and my dad was a professor. And he ended up being a research psychologist that, when I'm a kid, all I hear is teacher. So I just wanted to be like them. And then kind of going through life, I kind of figured out that I wanted to be a therapist. How I figured that out, though, was coming into being diagnosed ADD as a woman, especially a young adult. I think that, fundamentally I was set up for complete success. The bones were all there. I was put in preparatory school. I was given, full reins of anything I needed, access-wise and, attention span. I wasn't overloaded with distractible things. I mean, when I was growing up, there was screen time. There was no Game Boys. I mean, we didn't have internet. So all of those things I didn't have access to, yet I was still failing in school, emotionally dysregulated, and the way that I was perceived was that it was, and this is my parents, but they perceived as that I'm doing something wrong. I'm purposely talking to people next to me. I'm purposely looking out the window. And really, I'm like not retaining. Like there was no retainment. And it took them, the understanding that maybe their daughter, you set this perfect picture up, maybe Concerta, extended release. And honestly, the intervention happened. I transitioned to a different school and I got a medication and I graduated 5th in my class. I got a 4.0 in my grad school. I think I graduated from Florida State undergrad, 3.8. It really was the click. And you know what? It really was the retainment. It's me actually reading and then I can recall it. Instead of being in this dissociated state, if something was going on in my brain, if something was going on in my life, what I would feel is what I would retain. And so I could be reading stuff. Didn't matter. If I was going through something stressful, whatever that day, that's what I'm going to recall. Nothing on paper. And so that click of medicine and being able to access resources. I mean, they literally were like, all right, we're going to put you in even a smaller school. You're going to get you're going to be in like a white walled room with like nothing. You're going to get all that. And I did all of it. And I really succeeded, And I think that was a big thing for them because they had to admit that there's something there, but it was also a easy cop out too. But I think that in those 5 years of being, reprimanded, I mean, I had a different childhood than my sister. She doesn't have ADD. So she immediately, and my dad's very, very smart. He's a very prominent research in brain development and dyslexia. for the world, and he's very well known. And I think that kind of clicked, like my sister and my dad. And then I'm kind of the outlier where, I'm the distractible one. I'm highly intuitive, intelligent. So it seems like I'm just doing this on purpose because they can see my ability. And so it was so having those couple years where I was punished, and not like any absurd way, but in ways where I wouldn't be allowed to go to, maybe summer camp that summer, or, get that Game Boy, or whatever. And it wouldn't be until the next round of grades. And, and having that constant failure, that really shaped a lot about me. And so getting that diagnosis right before high school, that kind of pushed me into psychiatrist. I had to have a psychiatrist to get the medication. And so with that became the therapist. And so then I got that access in high school, and I got into psychotherapy. And then I really got into being able to be seen. And then I could figure out how to translate myself, because that's the biggest thing. Because, you only have a short amount of time with people, and just, in lasting tones, impressions, and conversations. And so really, I always end up, rushing people, or, it always ends up being, this main character syndrome that I push off. But in reality, I'm really overthinking and overanalyzing how the situation can be okay for you. And it ends up being very distractible. And so I don't even know where this is going, but what, like tangent.
Well, no, I mean,
Yeah.
I think that the fact that you are an LCSW, you are a clinical director.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And you have a mental health story of your own.
Yeah.
So I feel like what I'm hearing there is the belief in medicine, in, treatment, whether it be therapy, whether it be, some of the tools that we have out there, even for parents.
Yeah.
I'm curious, what was the relationship like with you and your parents following, when you...
Amazing. Oh my God.
And you got the help and you got on medication.
Amazing.
Was there resentment because they were punishing you, or...
No, it was amazing. Like me and my mom immediately clicked. And my dad is very, very, he's very emotionally distant. He's very analytical. So that relationship only grew, though, because my grades grew. I mean, there was tangible things. My dad is a tangible person. He's a researcher. So there's got to be statistics behind things. So for me to even present something or even go forward, there had to be evidence. He's very evidence-based. So there's immediate evidence. So the relationships became solid. And, it's crazy because I didn't even think about being resentful until certain situations happened in my life. And I've looked back and I was like, dang, that's why me and my sisters have, the exact same foundation, and we're the complete polar opposites. I mean, it's like I am completely the person. I feel like, the show where it's when people are like, what would you do in public, and there's cameras, I am that person that would jump in and be like, excuse me here, what is that, and my sister would be never doing a thing. And I'm like, how did I get that? But that fierceness in me is the nature in me, because I had to fight against the nurture. I was not being nurtured by my parents correctly because they did not know how, because they didn't know that it was a simple thing. ADHD in women, what does that look like? It's not hyperactivity. I'm not bouncing off the walls. It's not that I can't control. It's not that I can't focus. I have no ability to control what I focus on. So if that's a window right there, that's going to feel really good for my eyes. It's going to just set the tone, the lights. I mean, everything. I'm neurodivergent. I mean, what does that mean in ADD? That means that textures, for women, it's just so different. And that was just it was nuanced. It was new, and they didn't know yet. And so, but I didn't think about the impacts until a lot later, because that definitely comes out in my personality, because I think that from a very, younger age, I kind of it was the nature inside me kind of had to fight it out. until I got it right. And they were like right behind me. My parents were amazing. They were like, as soon as they realized, they're like, oh my gosh. But I do feel like it was, could have been a little bit sooner. But I mean, in that culture, I mean, Madison, it's like 1990s. No one's like doing that. I mean, I can't think of another girl, that was, going through that in the 90s. It was weird for girls to be ADD. I don't know what that meant. Like I when I actually got diagnosed, they put me, and I had like a million tests. It was like 48 hours, like 2 days of testing. And it was like a button test was the ADD test. That was the one that I freaking got.
I took that one.
You took that one. I knew.
I
and
failed miserably.
I figured I failed it, but you know what? I knew that was the ADD one, and I tried not to. And that's, I don't know, there's some kind of, well, whatever. But I didn't mark for depression or anxiety at that point. And it was like literally ADD. And so it really was a really quicker fix. And then, but the whole relationship with my parents and stuff, but I had a therapist. So I had to see a psychiatrist once a month, but that came with a therapist. So I developed an amazing relationship with a therapist, and she followed me even through some of my hardest times in my life too, she remained like a pivotal role, and she's full circle moment too. So yeah, I had that. So yeah.
So you fast forward college, you go to Florida State.
Yeah.
Then you go off to grad school. You're living in South Florida now. Your parents were still living in the Panhandle at the time, or?
Yes. So by that time, my dad, he had developed. He was a co-founding of the psychology department for Florida State, a researcher in brain development dyslexia. So he's like a lot of books. He has a lot of publishing. He published a test a little while back, and he's actually doing his second version of the test right before he retires, which is convenient for him. And so he does a lot of work in the field of research, not applied. So I'm the complete opposite. So that brought him to London in the summer. So after I graduated, I think I had a year under my belt of being in the field. And it was in 2016, I lost my mom. And so that was like the first experience where mortality, and in that was the fentanyl. So it was crazy. The month before my mom was killed, I had my first client death. So it was really a surreal experience. It that kind of kick-started a lot of trickle down mortality events where I kind of got catapulted in my own what does mental health look like for me? Because now we get dealt cards in our lives, and I picked a joker, and it was oh my gosh, I can't put it back. I have to. That's really what it felt like for a while. So yeah, that was that.
So that was within your first year.
Yeah, being in the field as a therapist. So a year before my mom, and we can back up to, I'll tell the story, but before my mom was killed, I'm literally Googling what to ask as a therapist. So I have just one little year, one little baby year. And doing substance abuse therapy, I had a whole scale. It was probably 20 to 30-year-olds. And I did see a whole scope of a lot of things, but still my scope of life was just very, very minimal. I was 26 years old. And yeah, so what happened was my parents were coming back to the States the next day. It was their closeout of the summer. I was just there. I had spent the last week with them.
In London?
Yeah, in London. And it was such a great time. It was such a random trip too for me, which is a whole part of the experience. But in that, I had an option to do something else. I was going to go to the Hamptons with the boyfriend that I had at the time, and I literally was homesick in the middle of the summer. And I was like, I'd rather just spend the week with my mom. And I texted my mom, and they had already been in London for the summer. This is probably in June, and I was like, I think I'd rather just because I was I'd rather just come to London. I knew what I was getting myself into. I've been to London a million, at that point, so many times. So I was I just want to do that. And she booked the flight. I woke up the next morning and the itinerary was there, and I was okay. So that was the last week of July. So I was there. So I decided to go home the day before their last day, because that's a packing day. And as you know, I am the youngest child. So there's like a syndrome that comes with that. So, you know, I did my due diligence, but yes, so I left that day, and I took I took a red-eye flight, and I came right back to the facility. I was getting my hours for licensure too. So my work ethic was like on point. And I remember I came into work, and I had like so how I split up my week, and this is how crazy I was I left on a Wednesday and I came back on a Wednesday. So like I could see, if I like did 2 12-hour days, like I could see all my patients on my caseload. Then by the time I come back, I could see everybody, and like not really that much work would have to be done by anybody. And that's exactly how it played out. Like it literally, so I did the red-eye flight, I came right back, and I was back-to-back clients. So at this point, you know, it's IOP. So evening IOP is this like evening time class where it's like a 6 to 9 p.m. It's for people that are in the workforce. They, you know, it's that you get nighttime credits, it's therapy, and you can see I was an individual therapist. So I was seeing some clients that I had in that program. And so again, I had just seen back-to-back clients, and I had someone in my office, and I remember my phone was sitting next to me, and it said Dad calling me, and I'm like, that's weird, because normally when he calls, they call me from their London phone. And what's up? Okay, so I saw that. So so you just picture this. So right, I'm in session, I'm like with you, and I see that my phone, and it's like Dad Wagner. I'm like, that's weird, because at that point, I mean, it's me and my mom. We're talking. We literally my dad worked the entire week. And so me and my mom were jumping around, coffee, champagne, shopping, conversations. We did the whole thing, the entire 7 days. So my dad called me. It was weird. And the fact that it was a London number. And so then it was a voicemail. And so at that point, I had that like feeling, so I rushed the patient out. I remember saying, you know, like I closed up the session. I was like, something, you know, I got him out, and I listened to the voicemail, and I'm sure it was like, call me back. And so I called him, and he was like, I am so sorry, your mom's been killed. And I was like, what? And he was like, your mom's been stabbed. And I'm like, so I'm thinking, like, first of all, like I just got off the plane. Like I was just there, like what? Like I could not. I remember just hanging up the phone, and then I kept on calling him back and being like, are you sure? Are you sure? And optics was that I was giving, I mean, he was sending pictures like of their dinner. Like I had like a picture of her with her limoncello shot with her dessert. And so within 45 minutes of receiving that picture, my dad's calling me with this news. So crazy. It was like, it just was so surreal. So on the interim, what actually had happened was they, went to their local favorite Italian restaurant, Ciao Bella, in London, which is right around the corner from their flat. And someone was having a paranoid schizophrenic break. It was a 19-year-old Somalian immigrant, if I'm correct, picked up a butcher's knife somewhere in this break and ran through a park and decided to start stabbing people. And a part of that was my mom and I think 5 others. I think my mom was, in the interim, she wasn't the first and she wasn't the last. But yeah. And that was it. It was like that phone call was like a period. Like, you know how you hear the thing where it's like no is a sentence? Like that was like what, because, you think when you get those, like, it's like, I guess you don't ever think about like what that would look like, but like, I don't know, maybe Grey's Anatomy fucked it up for me, but like, I thought like the doctor or someone's gonna, like, she didn't, like, there was no hospital, like there was a body bag, like they determined it there on the scene. And, obviously there's news and, that became a whole other part of the surreal because it became, initially it was a terrorist attack as, it was was a threat, of that, because he had a Moss card, because of his nature of his religion. And so, that started the whole, newscast of everything. So that even made it even more surreal. But for me, it was more of that she didn't make it to the hospital. Like it was like there then. So that kind of the no was like that period. The mortality was like left. And it was like, that was the, how when you have those events in your life, it's like, but before Christ, after Christ, like before mom, after mom, like that was like the pivotal time. It was like literally I grew exponentially. And it's been honestly like the only thing that I, the constant is like I have nothing to complain about. Like the overwhelming sense of gratitude. And that ends up being like my, my own fault too. It's like the sword that I fall onto, because gratitude, people that don't have it, is like a huge trigger for me. So, I'm in personally, not therapeutically, I can help everybody, but personally, when people don't have it, and I'm like, oh my God, like, you don't have to have like my experience to kind of like, not waste people, respect people's times, or like, be honest about how you're really, taking this experience and stuff. And that when people just abandon that, it really does, like, it strikes a nerve. But
so first off, I want to apologize, about your mother.
Thank you.
That's a horrifying story, and I really could not imagine. And the crazy thing is, I remember in 2016, I got probably everyone with a smartphone in the U.S. got that alert about a terrorist attack in London. I'll never forget it. I was at a Chinese food restaurant in New York City. I'll never forget it.
That's crazy.
And everyone thought there was a terrorist attack, and it was a schizophrenic having
Russell Square stabbing. It's a Wikipedia page. Yeah.
This was mental health directly impacting your life, your mother.
That's so crazy that you said that. And that's, yeah.
But one of the things I admire about you, and I'm so happy that you're on this show, because you give a lot of hope. You talked about before, for me, when you talked about the parents, your parents punishing you for maybe not paying attention in school when you were suffering from ADHD. Yeah. And I was like, well, where was the resentment? Like, were you resentful towards your parents? You're like, absolutely not. Our relationship grew from there, and it got better. Yeah. And then, again, I am terribly sorry about your mother, but you talked about your mother before mom, after mom, and then you talked about the time after mom. Your life has you've grown as a person, and you've become so grateful for the things that you do have. How did you get to a place after such a tragic loss to become grateful?
Begrudgingly. I'm obviously, like, you don't want to pick up that card. 26 years old. I'm not, you want your mom for your first kid. You want your mom for all. You don't realize how much you want your mom until you obviously don't have her. But there's no one that's gonna pay attention to you like your mom does. Like those like little like appointments, and then they care about like if the doctor calls you, like those things, like they just disappear. And so that was the mom that I got. Not everybody has a mom like that, but. And so specifically for that, it was like begrudgingly, I had to become my own like woman, and like understand that like that I had to just, what happened was basically I got thrown off my axis. You get thrown onto an axis that kind of is well oiled, and it was very operational until 26 years old. And there wasn't really anything to pinpoint, and there was nothing even, so there was no health concerns. There was no like crises in our family. And so really this was such it felt like a lightning bolt. And I think that's how my body handled it too. Immediately, the process of it was crazy. As you said, how you found out, right? I remember being that was when Snapchat was first a thing, and there was the Daily Mail. And that morning, you know, like I'm on my phone, like I'm like this the next morning, and it was the Daily Mail, and I remember clicking on it. And it was like, that was like and I remember seeing the white, and that was like my mom there, and I was like, holy, like this is not real. So that whole experience was like, it was like very, I mean, this shock and surreal. It's so hard to relate, and I think that was the biggest struggle too, was trying to find someone to relate to. And I remember just repeating to myself, this is like someone losing someone in a car crash. Like literally, like you're saying goodbye, love you, and like you guys are both getting in the same car, and like someone get, like that's like all I could equate it to. And that is something that is profound. But I think that understanding that like there was never any anger, like the situation was like, and that's a weird understanding to say and a piece to have made, but I don't know how that, like, I can't say how that happened, but there was never an anger part. It was really just like, I cannot believe this has happened. And, but I didn't have that anger towards like the person. I actually really was like, you know, with this specific person, I knew, I was like, this person's never ever going to affect my life ever again. Like, what are the chances in this world? Like that we're not even across paths. And I knew that. And so that's where it's like, that's the evidence base in me, where that made that like, okay. And like the situation was very apparent of what was happening, what happened with this person and his break. And I just happened to be in a field where I knew 19 to 23-year-old men who seemingly might have, you know, perfect childhood, or like with no, you know, significant emotional disruptions, and don't have substance abuse really that would like provoke anything anytime sooner, have a natural break around those ages. And so, you know, for our family to deal with, they didn't deal with it. They didn't know how to. And it like in the interim of like, just so happens like that was my parents' last dinner. They never go that late, but it was like they just wanted to get their last, you know, meal before they came back for the States. What I came to understood was, you know, he didn't even live in London. You know, his family was going back to some country, and they were so scared. They were like, he's hearing voices, something's going on with him. So they left him with his biological father in London, and within 24 hours this happened. So it's like, you could either look at like, my brain, it didn't even go into like, I could be the unluckiest person in the world. Like I didn't even go into that. It was literally like, this was just in front of me. Like this was like, it was all encompassing. Like there was no time to think about like the woulda, coulda, or like how, like in that never was a process. So I think that like in that, I think I got lucky. I think that's where begrudgingly, yeah, I didn't want to pick up the card, like where I am in life. Could have definitely used another good 26 with my mom, you know? And, but like what that did was make me like an incredibly self-aware and like effective therapist, because like then I actually went through, and you know what's crazy is when I went through that's considered secondary trauma, because it's a phone call. Like I got a phone call of it. Like my dad would have, because he was there, he was walking with her, so he would have the PTSD, the post, like the you know, primary trauma. So my diagnosis would be like acute stress reaction, because I have a secondary trauma. So like in the trauma realm, that's where that falls into it. And so and see how impactful that was for me. Like it was, you know, and so that in the scope of it, people are really dealing with things when they have trauma in their lives, and it comes in completely different forms. I mean, there's obvious ones like this, and then there's, you know, subtle ones. But I think that, yeah, I think this is the significant event. And so with that, I do like, you know, the coming out of this is I approach life with, I've already been through the worst thing in my life. And for me, it's like, couldn't get a more worse phone call. I mean, I'm sure, yes, when I have kids, like there's going to be times, but like for me, it's like I've already gotten that first initial, like, because any other time, I got it. I know exactly what I'm probably going to feel like. And, like I actually know like operationally, like what if someone did have suddenly die close to me, like actually what happened. So I do have that knowledge. But, like no, you can't take that away from me. So it's like I've already had that worst experience. So it really made me more of a fearless person. And so in that becomes like being my level of assertion, And so in the clinical field especially, I became like very, very like driven. And so I definitely was recognized. And, it comes across maybe as, what would we, I'm trying to think of what kind of woman in the field. I mean, because a clinical director, it's usually women, it's female, but like you have to be the ones that set boundaries in the company. So you kind of get that like role, like you kind of get that title, but I don't care. I developed into that like sooner than I had to, but in a more positive way. And I kind of got grandfathered into this position, but I held it because I also held my own, like without my mom, like for like since 2016. But like I did that, and I got licensed. I think it was like 2 years after my mom, and then like becoming clinical director was like maybe a year later. So there was like a lot of things that were happening after that I was like figuring out, and so like with that I kind of I stood on my own. So coming into the career as like being like a director of something where it's like up is, ownership and leadership. And so like clinically you are, on your optics wise, like you're on a, kind of your lone playing field, and you see your medical director over there. So you really are on a lone playing field. But if it wasn't for like an experience like my mom or something, like I wouldn't have been thrown into like being driven to like go different clinically.
So in recovery, so I'm sober, and in recovery, when they say in order to keep what you have to give it away. So not only should you be helping others on a daily basis, other alcoholics who are, let's say, newly sober or even addicts.
Yeah.
Even when things are getting tough, if you go through something pretty traumatic, a traumatic breakup. I went through a divorce. During my divorce, it was advised by my sponsor in recovery to go out there and start helping as many people as you can. Go into meetings, put your hand up, share. The people that are counting days and putting their hands up, go to them after the meeting, get their phone number, follow up with them the next day, hold them accountable. When you experience that traumatic event with your mother, it sounds like you really threw yourself into your work, and your work on a daily basis. I mean, on your ride over here, you were talking about,
I was Baker. I Baker acted somebody.
Yeah, you were helping someone on your way over here.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. And look, that's a tool. That is a tool that people use to get through traumatic events and through tough times.
Yeah.
How did that play a factor into the grieving process and help you move forward?
It helped me. I mean, honestly, like if not for that time, and so what happened was, so she was killed, and it was, I think it was on a Wednesday, and so we were in like this limbo where my dad was there, and so he was caught up a couple more days. So finally he came back to Tallahassee, and then we did a whole celebration of life because it took a while. The whole process is again, it's like so mortal. It's like a whole thing. But so I guess they ended up catching the person, like as as it was happening, kind of thing. They had to keep her body so that the defense could possibly do another autopsy to rule out if paramedics could have done life-saving measures at that. I'm like, holy re-traumatizing. I don't even know what ended up happening, but we ended up getting her body released. But it was time. It like literally we had to give that, we had to wait for that space and give the grace for that, procedure. I don't know. And so we had like a celebration of life for the public where people could initially experience it within like 7 days. And then I think like 2 weeks later, she finally made it back. and then we did like a private. And so in that time, which is crazy, is I did go right back to work. And people were like, what are you doing? And you know what? Is I was completely needing it. Like I said, all encompassing. I remember it just being like just on my mind and all the time. So going right back into working and grabbing people that had imminent problems, like their homelessness, like they are like, substance abuse, like, recent trauma, like recent prostitution, like recent, things that they are working out. It's like imminent things. It took my mind off of that. And so, leaving there at, 4 p.m., that means at 4 until I fall asleep, I'm thinking about what's going on. And so it really did help me. And and if I would have stayed at home alone, or if I would have, done a grief time, I think that would have conditioned me in a wrong way. I think that was one of the best tools I had, was to be able to focus on someone else so that I didn't become, main character syndrome with this. And it helped me. Yeah.
Being you're in the mental health space.
Yeah.
Were you ever able to come to terms, and I don't want to say come to terms and with the guy who did stab your mother and forgive him?
So it's so crazy because there's not a thought. I don't have a thought. Like there's no thought towards him or the forgiveness part of it. And no. So this is my thought towards that. And this is healthcare, right? So, his sentence, we did victim impact letters, and, he obviously was sentenced, but because of his condition, his sentence ended up being involuntary manslaughter with diminished responsibility. And that was where the resentment, if there was any kind of resentment in that, that's where that kind of, because it's like, okay, involuntary, I understand that part. Like, he was not voluntarily, in that state of mind to make a decision, but with diminished, so who's responsible? With diminished responsibility, so does the mental health, like, just take up that responsibility? Like, where, like, diminished responsibility, I don't know. Like, it's just hard. It's like, it just seemed like very, like, kind of like for what that experience was, and like what, I mean, honestly, the news reported it, so they could just like go back to that and see what that was. That, like, the charge, like, on paper, it did not make sense. And, my mom was the only one that passed away, but there was other victims, and I know there was at least one man that had reached out to my dad afterwards, and he had been in the hospital for 3 weeks. I mean, the person was specifically going for major arteries in people. So, and it was with such a small knife. So it was so it seemed superficial. And the whole experience is, that's how my dad had taken it, was a superficial. Like, it was hard for people to understand, like, that the severity of it when it was happening. And so, like, it felt so impactful. And like that whole sentencing was kind of like, so with that, he gets sentenced for a very long time to a mental health place. And with that, like, loss of HIPAA, all of that protects them. So you never find out, like, what happens afterwards. So me being in that mental health space and knowing that, like, if there's no jail sentence, and like it's when they deem that person, so it's when they they decide that they're medically they're capable of staying on that regimen for however long they can, then that's when they release them. I have no idea. So I don't know how long that could be. So thinking in that direction, like, literally, again, I'm like, this person's never, there was no weight to forgiveness in that situation, really. Yeah.
Were you ever triggered? You said you were, I believe, what was it? Secondhand traumatized, was it?
Oh, secondary trauma.
Secondary trauma.
Yeah.
Were you ever triggered again from a phone call?
Oh my God.
By someone?
Yes.
And what does that trigger look like? And what have you implemented to prevent being triggered?
Yeah. So That's like a big one. Yeah. Like power calling with no reason. My friends will know, like, if they're calling me or if there's a missed call and they normally don't call me. Like my best girlfriend, Mary, she'll literally call me. If I don't answer, she'll text me and be like, hey, this is the reason why I called. Like, you're good, so there's definitely that. But yeah, if I have 5 missed calls and I wake up from a nap, like that's doomsday, like until I get a hold of that person. So there's been times for sure, like where I haven't gotten a hold of my sister and I'm like, my sister's dead on the side of the road. Like I'll create like stories in my head where if I cannot identify them. But I mean, no, it doesn't happen that often because I feel like people know me. And I mean, again, the fierceness in me, I'll tell you, do not call me twice without leaving me a fucking message. Yeah, you have to. You're good. You leave a message.
Yeah, I try to give as much context as possible.
You give me a lot of content, and I appreciate that. I will read it when I have time. Priorities.
Yeah.
So
and I'm always in the back, so it's okay.
No, I mean, it's like
no.
I'm high acuity. I mean, it's like people need me. Yeah, no, but yeah.
So, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was gonna say, yeah. So trauma with that, no. I don't think I don't think that there's like any kind of that experience. I think that would be really no. So yeah, no.
So as a clinical director, fast forward into your career and you becoming a clinical director, you've seen a lot in the addiction space, in the substance abuse space. Yeah. Let's talk about for the parents out there that are listening and with kids who have gone to multiple treatment facilities, multiple IOPs. What are you seeing with parents? Are you seeing a lot of enablement? Are you seeing a lot of what is the best way for a parent to handle a child who is addicted to some kind of substance and they love them so much and they don't want to let go, but the answer in some cases is to let go because that's what my parents, they cut me off and they stopped enabling.
The answer is detach love. And so that's learning how to like that's learning how to translate your love in a different way because it's being manipulated or used, and it's being used by a substance, right? It's being used by the addiction. It's being manipulated by the addict and the person. So recognizing that, being able to even get there as a parent, that takes someone to have like ego and humility to understand that, maybe our forms of thinking or our ideas of what our expectations of our child are not realistic, or what our perceptions of how they were raised it might not be what they think it is. And it's not about coming to an agreement. It's not about this happened and you have to recognize that. It's not about agreeing that yes, this was I was an absent parent, or no, I could have been, more engaged in this way, or, you didn't recognize or you didn't hear me when I needed help. It's more about just recognizing the other person's difference, like recognizing that there's another person's perspective other than your own, and being able to get to that point. It doesn't mean that there's a right or a wrong. That just means that you recognizing that there's a whole nother entity in this, and it's your child. And so if it's someone that is going to be in your life, if it's your spouse, if it's your partner, if it's your child, if it's your aunt, your parent, they're kind of like rightfully yours, right? And you have like that indebted sense of belonging to them. So you have to figure out, how am I going to be of use, right? Like the worst thing you can do is have friendly fire. And so if you're somehow enabling them, I mean, it's like that term is so misused, right? It's like when you hear trigger, it's like, oh, what is trigger? Nowadays trigger is misused. Trigger is, it's a response pattern, so it literally, smelling an apple or smelling a smell is like a trigger for a response of the first time that you smelled that smell, like it's senses. And so just by, misusing it, playing it around, and, where was I even going with that?
About detaching and tough love, and you were going into just the dynamic between a parent and a child. and how to
trigger.
Triggering them and how to. I mean, based.
Oh,
off
enabling.
Of
Oh,
yes.
Oh, enabling. Oh, yeah. There's so many different forms of enabling, and so like it's such a broad term because when people think enabling, you think, okay, so the parents are giving them $100 a week and they're using that for the money, you know, or they're letting them live at their house. There's so many other forms of enabling, you know, and it starts with like, you know, taking everything away. You know, I'm old. Like my parents were old school. Like when I got grounded, well, I snuck out one time in high school, and I was the person that said if I would ever sneak out again, caught. And homegirl, I got caught like immediately. I didn't know that there was that many home securities in 2006. You know, like where like the window radar. I don't even know, but I got caught immediately. And you know, my parents they shut off my phone. I'm like in high school driving, and they literally shut off my phone. Like they stopped my number. My girlfriends called, and they're like, "Hey, it's no longer a working number." My parents are like, "Yeah, your number does not exist. We will tell you when you can have another working phone number." Like it wasn't like that. So I'm like, I come from that kind of like. So when people show up and they have like phones, I'm like, you know, and like really nice thing, you know, like I just know that if I was set up, I mean, there's means now, and there is in with social media, which is something to recognize wholeheartedly, that with social media there's so much access to finances immediately. So like the old school way of like, who's giving you money, how are you getting it, what do you mean? Like we have access to something, an app, this, that. We can get our hands on something. So if we have the ability and we have that mindset where we're feeding some kind of addiction, you know, we're manipulative, we're going to find someone on our list to get $25. And if we get 4 of those people that day, then we got our fucking fix.
We're scoring that
We're
day.
scoring. So it's like the access is so much. Like parents need to understand, like, it's not even about impulse control. It's literally access to. It's so much more today, where it's so much. It's you can go so far in, and it's so quick, you know. And you know, with technology, it's like it's so hard to track. So it's like it with that. So the one thing about addiction, and the, you know, that personality trait of addiction is the instant gratification. And that is what like phones have given us, right? Like if I want to literally cater to my, you know, dessert satisfaction that I have in this moment, I can literally go on Instacart and like get it and deliver it waiting for me. You know, like that did not exist. You know, we would have to think, oh, do I really want to stop by and get freaking cookies on the way? No, I don't want to go out in public. Like I don't want to like get out of my car. I'm just going to go home. Like, so recognizing like that is, we are so changed in that development that now like impulses and intrusive thoughts, like dark things that like we, you know, naturally get as humans, we might have access to clicking and seeing what the other side of that looks like faster. And it's scarier for parents. And I think what we're seeing is, you know, I'm seeing the first wave, and within at least our substance abuse detox, the first wave of strictly fentanyl clients. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how old are you? And they're like 20, 19, never even done heroin. It's almost like, to me, and I don't know how, I'm like turning 34, you know that, but to me it's like hearing about a barbiturate. It's like, what? They're like, heroin? Like, no, they have the fentanyl. I mean, it was like 3 bags when I started, and now it's like, you know, half a, you know, 0.25, like the fentanyl, because it's just so deadly. And they have adapted and developed. And so understanding that if addiction and how we can, you know, utilize substances can be so flexible, why can't our mental health and why can't our, you know, nature inside of us become more flexible, and we can like be like, we can outcome it, like we can outsource it. And I think that's where people fail. And I think that that's where the loopholes, where if parents are parenting out of shame or guilt, you know, something happened where they missed something, or they're blaming themselves. So maybe they're not funding, you know, their son's halfway, or, you know, their son's rent, but they're, you know, emotionally talking to them every day, or, you know, there's ways to, you know, enable, and that's the broad term of it. And so when it's like enabling, everybody enables. If you're a supportive role in an active addict's life, you're somehow enabling it. There's not one part of you that shouldn't be intervening at it every opportunity. there's something, you know, that's you're failing at your role. So, you know, that's how I say it.
When the alcoholic or addict is ready, they're ready.
Yeah.
My parents did the caring
Right.
treatment facility for me and the bells and the whistles. Then the next time they were like, no, you're going to this place, this
Yeah.
hole in the wall. And I went.
And you got
And
sober.
that was it. Like,
What is it? Is when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
yes. And I feel like parents are taking on too much of the burden.
Yes.
And listen, detaching, I mean, I have a daughter, she's very young. I couldn't imagine detaching from a child when they're 20, 25 with a substance abuse problem.
Yeah.
But there has to be a line that is drawn for a parent to stop taking on that burden. And when that person is ready, they are ready.
Yeah. And I think that what happens is, you know, you can't be ready with like a whole like soldiers. Like you can't have soldiers like, you know, fighting with you, because then they have to surrender too. And that means that they have to say they're at fault. So it's like you really do, when people like come to that like change and shift, you really do have to be alone for it. And so, yeah, you know, it ends up being like, you know, heavy armor. It ends up going, you know, you're falling on your own sword. Like these, you know, people that are foundationally there to support you are harming you, and they're, you know, because they're creating the solutions for you, and you have not yet once like done something on your own yet, but our society expects you to, and we do too though, because you need to be doing this too, you know. But we, you know, we're gonna tap out on certain things, and we're gonna help you here, or we don't want you to, you know, lose your license, so we're gonna, you know, pay this, but you need to, you know, maintain this. There's all these like ebbs and flows of things that you get. But the reality is, if someone is dependent on something, or they're abusing something, and they're, you know, your family, your loved one, I mean, and you're any kind of picking up the phone without help, it's kind of, you know, in vain. And it becomes your own vanity. It really does. When you become aware, you become responsible to do, and then it becomes, you know, your responsibility. And that's like one thing as a clinician, you know, it's like with our oath and everything with the state, you do become a mandated reporter. So it's like I have that naturally, where it's like I think I consider people all the time, but I also am like a mandated reporter. So like ethically, I'm always trying to like see situations how they should be, and people don't always think that way. And it's crazy to me, because, you know, I think that foundationally I was given like proper parents, where it was like very like right and wrong. It's whatever your mom said. I could never split them. Like it was whatever mom said, you know, there was never like a split. It was a unified front. I didn't see fighting. I mean, there was like, it was pretty solid. So with that, you know, you have to look at like how the relationship is founded. And, you know, even in my situation, not having, you know, alcoholic parents, my parents were so restricted with drinking. I only saw, you know, wine, and it was 2 glasses. And the rule was, you know, you have 2 glasses every 24 hours, and you never ever, you know, do that. And like, that's just like that's how, you know, where it's like how does the shower turn on? I just knew that like adults can only drink 2 glasses, you know, that was how and so that's how I operated. And so conditioned in me, I got conditioned with, you know, limited alcohol use. But if you think about in other, you know, in other people's households where there's drinking every night and stuff, people are going to see that. And it's all about that desensitization. And that's what COVID did, right? It took everything. It brought us into a new realm, and we conditioned a new normal. And it kind of was like no, like it was, I mean, well, were you in Florida for that?
I was, the first year I was in New York and Savannah, Georgia, and then
so you started coming out. You're like coming down to
December
the crazy.
2020, I came down.
Okay, so yeah, so you saw what we were like.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we were like against the grain.
I loved it.
It was wild, and everyone did what they wanted, and it's still. I mean, people you saw, yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of consequences coming from COVID and substances and how people, you know, and how people chose to spend their time really with what's been going on. But I think that also, I think it goes again with instant gratification and just our ability to, I mean, honestly, since COVID, I haven't like shopped in a like
Store.
shopping center.
Yeah.
I've actually, I went to Whole Foods twice for like a water, but like I didn't go in like as a shopping experience. I have not one. Yeah. So I'm an Instacart person. So I fall to it too. I can't imagine like doing that. And so we have to learn like the biggest part about mental health and mental well-being is being able to be flexible. And so like in physical health, like, right, like being able, if you're flexible and you're stretching, you're going to be able to, build muscles that, aren't able to grow. So like you have to be flexible for what's coming. Who would have predicted in 2019 COVID? Like that was like wild. I have like a picture of me in San Francisco, and it was like February like 9th, 2020 or something, like I don't know, right before like it all went down. And I remember like my best girlfriend was like, Shannon, no COVID. And like that was like that happened, and then it like happened, and then it like just, it was earth shattering. It was like a experience, and what's crazy, and this is where like the gratitude comes in, where I'm always like profound, and I'm like, this is going to be like written in history books. Like, how we like see when we were kids and we read about the Holocaust and like that, like we're going to read about this and how we were. And if we actually think about what we did, it wasn't that great during that time. Like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't know that many people around me that were really productive. And so like, it's just crazy to think that we're going to like, this is going to be a part of history. Obviously, it's a negative part of history. It's a virus, a global virus. There's tons of deaths around it. But like during the actual time, it's like, no, there was a lot of drinking. People didn't work. I worked. I was an essential worker. And so I had to figure out how to work remotely. And it was crazy because I lived in a 3-story townhouse. And at that time, I had 2 Frenchies. And no one was allowed out of their house. So we were like, I was like full of anxiety, and my Frenchies are like crazy. At that time, like 3 and 4. It was like wild. I'm like living alone. Everyone's knocking at the door. I have Instacart, like, I'm like, got everything going on. My 2 dogs get in like a scuffle. Like I could not separate them. It was bad. There was, and they're French bulldogs. They're like bulldogs. So anyways, one ends up losing its eye. Horton. Yeah. He lost his eye. It was week 2 of like, and it was literally a drive-by where I like went to the animal hospital, and they picked him up out of my like car window because they couldn't even like have contact with me. Yeah. So that happened, but that was a direct, I mean, I never worked. Like I'd always gone to work every single day, and my dogs are like, what are you doing here all the time? I mean, like all of a sudden they want to go out of the house like every 4 hours. I'm like, you guys knew about the fucking 12 to 16s. Like, don't even act. But all of a sudden we're all regressed. We're all fighting with each other. I mean, it was wild. It was a wild time.
What advice would you have for 26-year-old Shannon who just experienced a tragic loss in that moment?
So it's funny because in that moment at 26 years old, right, I remember thinking like, I'm the only one. Like I could not, there was one girl, and she was one of my roommates, and she was actually a close friend at a time period in my life, not at that time. And she had lost her mom before, so I didn't even know her in that loss, but she was the one person. And what I like to say, it's like the DPC, Dead Parents Club. It's like, you just, if you know. But she was the only one I could think about. And that night, so at that point, it was hitting the news. And so when it first happened, I contacted all of my girlfriends. I remember I ran out of the building, and I opened the door, and I was like, my mom's dead. And so we were trying to contact people to like drive me home, because they're like, this girl, it was crazy. So I was in that time when I was getting picked up from my girlfriend in Boca, I was calling my family or my girlfriends in Tallahassee. And they were all at the same workout class, all 3 of them. So I'm like calling them, and they never do that. And so finally they start calling me back, but by this time they know, because I had texted them. And so what was the point of that? Where was I going with that?
I think you were leaning towards you're not alone. When you're going through something like that.
So they got a hold of me, right? And so I remember I was at my girlfriend's parents' house, and they had scooped me up, and they were like I really, there's a lot of people after grief, and there's, in the grief process, and I think it's so important. There are so many like outliers in that process because it's such a blurred process, especially for me in my story. It has to be. But there are pivotal people that are, in my life today and not in my life today that I have immense like respect and gratitude for what they like stood up for, because it was such a shocking experience. And there's so many people that stepped up and like really operated me like ADL, like down to my ADLs, like literally before I went to Tallahassee, and my best friend's mom like took me to the gynecologist, birth control shot, get her going. Like I literally down to that. Like we need to we don't like we'll help you function down to the last, thing. And so I had, but back to that. So my girlfriends got me in touch with, the girl that I had, my previous roommate actually, that had lost her mom, and she had lost her mom to cancer, but she called me that night, and I'm like, because it's like my best. None of us even had like a friend that had died in a car accident. We were like so fucking privileged, really. I have nothing to complain about. Really, it was all self-created. There was nothing. So with that, they put me with this girl, and her name was Jessie. I love her today. And we've grown to be very, very close. And she called me, and she had a conversation. And so in that night, the blurred perspective, I do have I know where I was and, who I was with, but she called me and she had a conversation, and she told me she was just very candid, and she was like, this is like real, because I think that was the biggest thing. It was like that couldn't be real. And then even like the news stuff, like that didn't make it better for me. That made it even more surreal. Like I'm like this girl from Tallahassee, and like this does not make sense. This is BBC, but this is also USA Today. Like this doesn't compute. So it wasn't helping. But she told me, she was like, she said, she's gonna, you're gonna learn to know what okay looks like, and it's just gonna look a lot different. And she even went down to it. I remember she said, starting with the holidays, like she was like, Christmas is gonna look different. Everything now is in your front. Like you have to like embrace and accept. And I just remember being like, holy shit, like. It was just like literally just like being a player of something like not my life. Like this was just like, she's basically like giving me my safety instructions. Like as I'm like going into like battle, I'm like, wait, what? Like, where are we going? Like I didn't sign like, like what am I doing? And I remember that phone call, and she actually became a big part of my grief process, like having her, to sound off of, it was a very different situation. But just having like that same after effect with our dads too, and being young women, like young unmarried women too, losing our moms is like, it was just like, it's kind of like hopeless. It's like a little bleak. Yeah. It gets a little bleaky sometimes. But in that there's always a horizon.
Well, Shannon, thank you so much.
Oh my God.
I really appreciate you coming on and taking the 10-minute ride down the street.
I love that. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes.
I hope I gave you guys some good knowledge.
Amazing knowledge.
All right.